you guys, welcome to a flipped classroom video. So every day you're going to see a video like this. You are welcome to pause the video, fast forward, rewind. Remember, this is supposed to be your time to learn, so you kind of conduct it however you see fit, okay? We're going to start with complex numbers, just reviewing them. So remembering that I squared equals -1, which means that I is the square root of -1. So we need that because, for example, if I needed to evaluate the square root of -25, I could split this up into the square root of 25 times the square root of -1. And I want to do that because this whole thing that I just highlighted turns into I. And I know the square root of 21 is 5, so I just get 5i, okay? So using that, we are going to find the zeros, which remember means x-intercepts of each function, using the zero product property, where remember you set each factor equal to 0. So 2x minus 5 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0, and x plus 2 equals 0 again. So I'm going to get x equals -2, and since it happens twice, this is some vocabulary that we don't know yet. I'm just trying to set it up so that you can see it more than once. This is called a multiplicity of 2. Multiplicity just means that this x-intercept occurs twice because it's here and here, okay? Our other x-intercept, if I solve for x, ends up being x equals 5/2. So we end up with 3 x-intercepts because remember, I have x times x times x. So this would be an x cubed function with an odd end behavior. Moving on to the next one. I have x times x times x times x. So this is an x to the 4th function, which is an even end behavior. And my degree is 4, because that's my highest exponent. I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. So x equals 0, x equals -4, and the i's work the same way, don't let that confuse you. X plus 2i equals 0, x equals -2i, and x minus 2i equals 0, x equals +2i. So I have 0, -4, -2i, and +2i as my 4 x-intercepts. Just reviewing, if I wanted to graph this, remember that these, because they're imaginary, they don't appear on the graph. We don't graph imaginary solutions because they're imaginary. So the x-intercepts I'm going to graph are -4 and 0. Now, because I know it has an even end behavior, I know my arrows are going to end looking up, okay? I also know that at most I have 3 turning points because remember, the turning points are always 1 less than the degree. So I don't exactly know what happens in the middle, but our graph might look something like this, where I have, here are my 3 turning points. I just guessed, right? I don't know exactly where they are. All we know are the x-intercepts. I just wanted you to know that even though there are only 2, there are really 4 total, okay? And we'll get more into graphing these later. So looking down at number 2, I know you guys have an A and a B. I gave you a B just for extra practice, but I write really big, so I'm just going to talk about A. So remember, I'm giving you one of the x-intercepts, which is 1, and I want you to find all the other x-intercepts. You should be finding 3 total x-intercepts because my degree is 3. Those are some important things to keep in mind. So let's use synthetic division with 1. Remember, you just write the coefficients for synthetic division. Pull down that 1. I'm just going to go through this. Feel free to pause the video and do it yourself. And you know you did this correctly when the remainder is 0. So anytime I'm trying to find I tell you if something's an x-intercept or a factor, the remainder should be 0, okay? So here is my number term, here's my x term, and here's my x squared term. So the function that I have left is x squared minus 4x plus 13. So right now, I only know one x-intercept, and it was the one they gave me. I know this is the x-intercept. But I need to factor this further so I can find the other 2. Now you have 2 options. You could either factor or use the quadratic formula. I would always try to factor first because that's easier. So when you factor, you're thinking of two numbers that multiplies to give me 13 and adds to give me -4. But there is nothing. Only 1 times 13 is 13, but that doesn't add to -4. So unfortunately, we have to use the quadratic formula, okay? So here we go. X equals the opposite of b, so opposite of -4 is 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So I'm asking you to do the same thing I was asking you to do up here. Determine the zeros, determine the zeros. This is just looking at it from a different perspective by using division. If it's not in factored form, you're going to have to use division to do this, okay? So x equals 4 plus or minus 16 minus 52 all over 2, which is x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of -36 all over 2. Now the square root of -36, remember we just talked about i's, this is going to end up being 6i, right? So I have x equals 4 plus or minus 6i divided by 2. Now remember that phrase, sharing is caring, that denominator is going to both numbers. So x equals 2 plus or minus 3i. So if I ask you to find all of the zeros, 2 plus 3i is an x-intercept, 2 minus 3i is an x-intercept, and 1 from this original, it told me this is the x-intercept. All 3 of these are my x-intercepts, okay? So some of you might notice that when I have an imaginary solution, 2 plus that I and 2 minus that I will always be an answer because I get to do plus or minus. So that will always happen. So if a plus bi is a 0, then a minus bi is also a 0. Okay, that will always be the case. So you'll always have 2 imaginary answers. You'll never just be left with 1. They come in as a pair. So if you see one with an I, the other one has to have an I too. Standard form, we're now going to start trying to FOIL things and writing things in standard form. Standard form means ax squared plus, erase that, sorry. It doesn't always mean that because it's not always a squared number. Standard form just means FOIL or expand. Okay, we want to FOIL or expand something as much as we can. So for example, here, I would write y equals x plus 2. If my x-intercept is -2, the factor is x plus 2. If my x-intercept is 7, the factor is x minus 7. And I would FOIL this, okay? And I would get x squared minus 5x minus 14. And if you need to pause this, take a minute and FOIL it out, feel free to do that. For part B, I know that since 4 is a 0, x minus 4 will be a 0. If -3i is a 0, then plus 3i will be a 0. But also, if -3i is a 0, you guys, then positive 3i has to be a 0. And that is what the conjugate zero theorem tells us. If a plus bi is a 0, then a minus bi is a 0. So -3i and positive 3i both have to be a 0. You'll notice the sign in front of your I term will always change from negative to positive, okay? So I need to have actually these 3 factors because remember, you should see i's in a pair. That's how you know you're doing this correctly. So when you see something like this, always FOIL this first. Make your life easier. If you don't, you're going to end up with something super messy. So I'm going to FOIL my i's first. So x times x is just x squared. X times -3i is minus 3ix. Positive 3i times x is plus 3ix. because I'm just multiplying those together. And this last one, 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. I times I is I squared. Okay? What you'll notice that will happen every time is that this middle stuff cancels, which is kind of nice because that 3ix is confusing. So the middle stuff goes away, and you're left with x minus 4 still in the front, and x squared minus 9i squared. Now, what I'm hoping some of you have just noticed is that I squared, remember, equals negative 1. So I'm going to replace this with negative 1. So I really get x minus 4 times x squared plus 9. Negative 9 times negative 1. Now I'm going to FOIL one last time. Okay, so this one just takes a few more steps. So my x is going to go to both items. X times x squared is x cubed. X times 9 is 9x. In a different color, I'm going to go for the next term. Negative 4 times x squared is negative 4x squared. Negative 4 times 9 is negative 36. Okay? If you notice, there are no like terms here, so there's nothing that we have to combine. And the last thing I do is I always put my answer in order. So I won't mark it wrong if you don't. It's just a good habit to get into. So if my exponent is 3, that's going to go first. My exponent of 2 is going to go next, then 9x, then 36. So I haven't changed anything in my answer. I just reordered to make it nicer, and that is my final answer. Okay? So make sure you have these notes. You get to use them for your mini quiz on Friday. Come back with another video tomorrow.